Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Burro Lot 17 Wash Processed Panama from September Coffee Company. And there's the bag right there. And September, based out of Ottawa, Ontario, and they're one of our most featured Canadian coffee roasters on this channel, though this has been the longest route we've had this year since we last reviewed one of their coffees. So when I found out that they were doing a collaboration with Airworks, it immediately caught our interest, though truth be told, we purchased nearly every collaboration that Airworks does. That being said, we did have positive results with the one and only washed Panamanian Geisha that we've reviewed from September earlier this year. And in addition to that, it does give us an opportunity to compare and contrast it alongside the El Burro that we also reviewed from Substance and H&S, which was another Airworks collab earlier this year. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this one compares, as this right here is day 63. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which does indicate a more medium fine grind roast profile for this coffee. So this also gives us a great opportunity to compare and contrast the profiles of the three El Burro coffees. This one is September's extra light profile, and in comparison to the one that we had from Substance, which was probably the lightest of the three that we did have given some of the characteristics that we did receive from that coffee, and then the one that we did have from H&S, which also seems to have some slightly lighter characteristics to it. Now that being said, those are two of the lightest roasting coffee roasters out there, and this one is no slouch when it comes to how light this coffee is as well. So this one, while maybe not necessarily quite as light as the Substance version of the El Burro coffee, is definitely still on the very light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 41, first impression through the V60, and the coffee is expectedly nice and clean. So one thing that did catch my interest about this one in comparison to the other El Burro coffees was that it was a little bit more intense than expected, especially in terms of the candied sweet sense to it. The listed green candy was a very interesting note given just how prominent the green characteristic was within this coffee, as there's a very intense lime-like quality to it, which is something that I didn't necessarily experience from either of the other two El Burro coffees, which were a little bit more floral forward right from the onset. So this one in itself was unique given that it offered a more citric approach to this coffee, so that definitely was the very first takeaway I had based on this first try. Day 44 through the Chemex, and the coffee is still a little bit more lively than expected, as there's a prominent mixture of citrus and brightness to it. So it also did feel a little brighter in certain aspects, as it's a little less sweet in comparison to the previous day, as it's offering a much more prominent intense green tone to it with a very clean lasting finish as well. Cleanliness does keep this coffee at a pretty enjoyable level, so I definitely had some positive experiences based off these first two tries. Day 48 through the UFO brewer, and the coffee is quite nice, as this definitely did help tone down some of the more citric intense qualities to it, offering a much better balanced experience as it's continuing to remain pretty straightforward in a citric and floral sense. Intensity continues to remain relatively high, especially for a Panamanian Geisha, as it's not quite as delicate as either of the other two El Burro coffees, but it's been pretty consistent nonetheless, so you're already starting to see a number of different characteristics when comparing it alongside the other two that we'd reviewed. Day 53 through the V60 with some higher extraction adjustments, so 17:1 at 99 degrees Celsius, and there were some mixed results, as it's better off brew, offering a wonderfully crisp florality to it with an abundance of the listed jasmine-like qualities to it, but it did skew significantly more in that green citric sense, so it's a bit brighter overall as well too, so we're just kind of seeing a bit of a different experience in comparison to the other two. Once again, it really seemed to accentuate a lot of the green characteristics to it. And I do want to say that it was one of these days that I actually tried this coffee brewed by somebody else at a coffee meetup, and the coffee was even more, I want to say, citric intense, a little bit more lime-like on that experience as well. So I feel like they were probably pushing this coffee even a little further than we were, getting that much more abundant green citric quality to it. So it was consistent regardless of how we brewed it or how else we tried this coffee. So this one just seemed to really skew heavily in that direction. Day 56 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the coffee is solid yet again, but it definitely had better days earlier on, as pushing this coffee just seemed to bring out a little bit of those grainy characteristics, and that does indicate the profile of this one. As mentioned, it's still an extremely light coffee, and you're seeing that demonstrated here this time around as well. I mean, the brightness is also another indicator of that, but the green citric qualities are presenting in a clean and candied sense, so there's been little deviation from what we'd experienced early on this coffee, but it's still pretty solid nonetheless. Day 60 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and the coffee does continue to remain very consistent, as it does focus heavily on the citric attributes to this one, much more so than either of the other two El Burro Lot 17s we had reviewed this year, as it's notably less grainy this time around as well. So pushing it did seem to bring out some of those grainy characteristics, but keeping it at a more standard level seemed to keep that toned down. There's some depth to the florality as well, as there's a little bit of a vanilla-like characteristic to it, a slight tart grape quality, and that very prominent lime-like characteristic, as there's also a slightly lingering and long-lasting green citric sense to it. So as mentioned, that has been pretty consistent, pretty abundant, significantly more so than either of the other two that we had reviewed. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And before starting this review, I actually took a look at the tasting wheel of the September one and then the one from Substance and H&S. And the one from Substance and H&S are very similar, but this one differs a fair bit. So let's go through it. We will start with the cleanliness level 5. This one honestly was not quite as in line with that level 5 as the other two, as I did find the florality in both of those to be a little bit better defined. And I think that's probably where the difference in this coffee is going to end up for me, is that it's still very clean. And at the end of the day, when making this tasting, I said, I'm getting excellent definition to the citric characteristics of this coffee, even if it's not necessarily my favorite. So we did bump it up there, but it's not quite as well defined in terms of the floral aspects to this one. So level 5, where we opted to put the cleanliness nonetheless. Next, level 5, we have the citrus fruit, level 5. It's one of the most well-defined citric qualities we've had from any coffee this year. So for people that really like that specific characteristic of a coffee, that is what's present in this one, as it's also scoring level 5. And believe it or not, we don't score too many coffees at a level 5 in terms of the citric fruit qualities. So that's interesting in itself. Let's go ahead and move on to the level 4s. We will start with the finish, level 4. It's actually on the higher side of the level 4. This one had a little bit more long-lasting of a finish than the other two, which oftentimes present in a much more subtle and delicate manner, as opposed to this one, which had a little bit more intensity. I mentioned if there's one thing that I could add to a tasting wheel, it would be intensity, because the other two were probably hovering somewhere around that 2 to 3 mark, where this one's probably on the higher side of the level 3 to like level 4 in terms of intensity. So just a little bit more in that sense. Sweetness, level 4. It could possibly be the sweetest of the 3, as well, as it definitely had a little bit more of that candied-like quality to it. I'll be completely honest, when I saw that note on this coffee, it could have had maybe a significant priming effect. I mean, the entire theme of this is very green. The bag's green, Airworks is green. There's 2 green descriptors on there, green candy, lemon, lime, that sort of quality to it. But even then, while it might have played a role, I just think that this coffee in comparison was that much more citric forward than the other 2 El Burro coffees that we did have. Florality, level 4. I mentioned as well that there's a fair bit of that jasmine vanilla characteristic, which were the most abundant characteristics in the other El Burro coffees that we did review. So level 4, where we opted to put that. A couple of level 3s, we will start with the acidity, level 3. I do want to double check that, as I don't think either of them scored a level 4, and they did not. So that's in line with the other two, though I do have to say that the brightness of this one did feel just a little bit higher, and it's probably because there's a little bit more of that citric quality to it. Berry fruit, level 3. I mentioned briefly that there was a little bit of that grape quality characteristic. I'm going to double check on the other two here. They also scored level 3s. Yeah, they did. Okay, that's consistent among the other two as well. That's always kind of funny how similar these tasting wheels can be. Stone fruit, though, I do remember was a little higher on the other 2 coffees than this one. This one's just there at the level 2. I can get traces of it, but maybe not as abundant as the other 2. And then last things worth discussing, caramel, level 3. That is entirely the candied quality of this coffee. As mentioned, it could be a little bit on the sweeter, more intense side of things, which did give it a different quality than the other 2. And then the final thing worth discussing, the body at a level 2, which I also do believe is the same as the other two El Burro coffees. Body's actually at a level 1 for the substance. Again, that kind of goes to show, and for the H&S. So this is actually the most textured of the 3 coffees that we did review, the El Burro coffees, as it's scoring there at the level 2 mark, so a little bit more body to it. Also, the savoriness and bitterness are also a little bit higher in comparison to the other two, so a little different in that regard. But yeah, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I feel like if you know my preferences, then you'll know that I probably did enjoy the other two a little bit more because they offered a more floral experience. The citric qualities for me are something I can live without. Like, having a very well-defined lime is fun, it's unique, and if anything, if I never had those other two El Burro coffees, I probably would have really enjoyed this one given just how well defined it was, just how unique it was. But given that I've seen this coffee present in a much more floral sense, a very well defined jasmine-like quality to it, then it's not surprising that I have a preference towards those. I mean, florality is one of the most important things to me, whereas citrus is something that I can give or take, and then the stone fruit characteristics were more abundant than the other two, so that's something that I seek a little bit more when it comes to these coffees. Also, they did feel a little bit cleaner, but what this coffee has going for it is that it's a little bit more intense and sweet, which can be a positive thing, though again, when it comes to Panamanian Geshes, I do like them to be a little bit more tame, a little bit more delicate overall, while still offering that very clean, well-defined floral quality, that very intense, I shouldn't say intense, but very well-articulated sweetness to go alongside that. So that's to say, I do believe that the substance was probably my favorite of the 3, though these are 3 of my favorite coffee roasters in the entire world. So it's picking between 3 beautifully done coffees. And outside of that, though, I should highlight that September does have my favorite Elida estate coffee. I just kind of wanted to throw that in there because I do think that you can enjoy the way that certain coffee roasters offer their interpretation of Panamanian Geshes more so than some other coffee roasters that you do very much enjoy. Like, I'm comparing the Elida Estate Falda alongside some of my other favorite Panamanian Geshes, and it's honestly my favorite that I've had from any of them. So credit to September on that one. I just feel like this one was a little further away from my own preferences in comparison to the other iterations of this coffee that I have had. That being said, the type of person that I would suggest this coffee to is somebody that does enjoy their more intense, citric-forward Panamanian Geshes, as this one did seem to skew much more in that sense as opposed to other experiences that we've had, not just with the El Burro coffees, but with Panamanian Geshes in general, as I do have to say, this one was unique in that regard. In addition to that, a little bit more intense, a little bit more sweet, while still offering plenty of florality. So on paper, this did score pretty high in everything that I'm looking for: cleanliness, sweetness, fruit qualities, and then the florality, even if maybe they weren't necessarily the types that I'm looking for the most, but it still offered plenty of those. So that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the El Burro Lot 17 Wash Processed Panama from September Coffee Company. Thank you for watching.